My name is Margaret Hale, and I am 62 years old. For most of my adult life, I believed I had married into a family that valued modesty, tradition, and quiet dignity. My husband Daniel and I spent more than 40 years building a stable life, nothing glamorous, nothing excessive, just steady. We ran a small accounting firm in our coastal town, raised 2 children, and watched the tides roll in and out of our lives with a kind of dependable rhythm. Daniel passed away 3 years ago, and that rhythm changed forever. His family, the Hales, were always complicated. They were the type that dressed modestly but bragged constantly. The type that talked about humility while quietly sharpening their knives. For decades, I tolerated their competitive little comments and their obsession with the Hale legacy, which, frankly, I never thought amounted to much. After Daniel died, they suddenly developed an almost desperate interest in our finances. At first, I thought it was grief. Family coming together. People trying to understand what had been left behind. But then the comments started. Little digs about how I was just the wife, how I'd been taken care of, how their family money had supported me for decades. None of it was true. Daniel and I built everything ourselves. Every dollar saved was earned through long nights of tax season chaos and careful budgeting. Still, I swallowed my irritation and tried to keep the peace. Because for a while, it felt easier to let them talk. That changed the day my sister-in-law, Judith, leaned across the dinner table, tapped her wine glass with her polished nail, and said with a smirk, "You know, Margaret, the family money has always been what kept things afloat. But don't worry. We'll manage things now." I remembered blinking, trying to keep my expression neutral. Manage things? My finances? My home? I told myself it was just bluster. Just the usual Hale arrogance wrapped in faux concern. But that night, I felt something settle in my chest, a quiet awareness. A pull. A voice telling me that something in their tone, their timing, and their sudden interest wasn't innocent at all. I didn't know then how deep their plans went. I didn't know how far they'd stretched the meaning of family money. And I certainly didn't know that Daniel had left behind a truth far more complicated than I'd ever imagined. But the first crack appeared during what should have been a simple Sunday dinner. As dessert was being cleared, my nephew casually mentioned that Uncle Daniel had always intended for the Hale inheritance to stay within the bloodline. Inheritance? Daniel never once used that word with me. I went home that evening with a gnawing suspicion. Something was wrong. Something had been set in motion long before Daniel died. And the way the Hales talked, as if everything that had been ours was already theirs, made my skin prickle. I didn't know the details yet. But I knew this. The Hales were circling. And I was about to discover exactly what they thought belonged to them. The real shock came 3 days later when I received an unexpected letter from the Hale family attorney. A letter that made my heart race and my hands turn cold. A letter that revealed they weren't just bragging. They were planning something. Something big. Something that would take every ounce of intelligence, patience, and resolve I had left to uncover. And that letter was only the beginning. The letter arrived mid-morning, tucked between a utilities bill and a grocery flyer. From the outside, it looked completely ordinary, white envelope, typed address, standard postage. But the sender name printed in the corner made my pulse hitch. Prescott and Amos, attorneys at law. Daniel's family's longtime legal firm. I hadn't heard from them since the week after the funeral. Inside was a formal notice titled, "Reevaluation of Hale Family Trust Assets." My eyes moved slowly down the page. Each sentence felt tightening, colder. According to the document, the Hale family had initiated a review of shared Hale estate properties. They claimed I was in possession of liquid assets and investment accounts traditionally belonging to the Hale lineage. They requested statements from my accounts. My accounts. And, this part made my throat go dry, they were asking for a meeting to discuss the transfer of certain assets back into Hale control. Transfer. Back. To them. As if Daniel and I had ever taken a cent from his parents. As if everything we built wasn't the result of our own labor. I set the letter down, exhaled slowly, and felt the betrayal in my bones. It was one thing to brag at family dinners. It was another to involve attorneys, to imply wrongdoing, to treat me like an obstacle to be managed. The timing wasn't coincidence, either. My husband had been gone long enough for grief to soften into silence, but not long enough for anyone outside the family to question changes in financial control. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter between my palms, and felt something inside me shift. I had been polite long enough. Still, before reacting, I wanted to understand. I wasn't going to walk blindly into a confrontation. I needed information, clarity, leverage. And then something else caught my eye. At the bottom of the letter, barely noticeable unless one looked closely, was a short line. Per prior communication with the Hale trustees. Prior communication. What prior communication? Daniel never mentioned any trust. And if he had, I certainly wasn't aware of any Hale trustees. A sinking realization spread through my chest. They had been planning this while Daniel was alive. Possibly for years. That night I pulled out our old file boxes, bank statements, business documents, life insurance papers. I combed through everything. Daniel had been meticulous about our finances, and I trusted him implicitly. But as I read deeper, I noticed small details I had overlooked before. An account I didn't recognize. A transfer from a Hale-controlled entity into a joint investment account, an account I had thought was entirely ours. And a note in Daniel's handwriting tucked into an old folder, something I had never paid much attention to until now. It read: "If anything happens, Maggie, check the dates. Check everything." I stared at his handwriting until the words blurred. Check everything. Had he known something? Suspected something? Daniel wasn't a man who left warnings lightly. I felt a knot of dread and determination form at the base of my spine. I wasn't just dealing with greedy in-laws. I was dealing with a coordinated effort. And if they thought I would simply hand over assets Daniel and I worked for decades to build, they didn't know me at all. The next morning, I scheduled a private appointment with my own attorney, someone far outside the Hale family's reach. But I wasn't prepared for what he would find. Or the secret Daniel had been keeping. One that changed everything. To understand what was happening, I had to revisit the complicated history of the Hale family, a family obsessed with appearances, tradition, and hierarchy. Daniel grew up in a household where money was power, but also a weapon. His parents believed deeply in keeping wealth contained within the Hale bloodline. Outsiders, even spouses, were never fully trusted with financial decisions. When I married Daniel at 21, his parents welcomed me politely but coolly. They liked that I was practical, responsible, and hardworking, but they never saw me as one of them. And they certainly didn't like the idea of Daniel building a life outside their influence. Over the years, their comments became predictable. When money stays in the family, the legacy stays strong. Marrying out always weakens the financial lines. When grandparents build wealth, grandchildren inherit it. Judith, especially, clung to this belief like scripture. She married twice, divorced twice, and relied heavily on the Hale family image to bolster her own fragile sense of worth. She was always jealous of the life Daniel and I built, quiet, steady, loving. No drama. No chaos. But Daniel had a complicated relationship with his family too. In private, he often confided in me that he wanted distance. He didn't trust their obsession with control. He once called the Hale legacy a gilded cage. Still, despite the tension, he never cut ties. He wanted to protect me and our children from potential fallout. What I didn't know was that the Hale family had established something years ago, long before I entered the picture. A family trust, created by Daniel's grandparents. A trust intended to safeguard Hale wealth and ensure that assets remained within the bloodline. Daniel had told me once, vaguely, that his grandparents left complicated arrangements. I never asked more because it never affected our day-to-day life. Or so I thought. During my meeting, my attorney, Mr. Fry, began gently laying out what he'd uncovered after reviewing the documents I brought. "Margaret," he said, leaning forward, "your husband was made a trustee of the Hale Family Trust when he was 21. But something unusual happened." He showed me a document I had never seen before. Daniel's signature. A renunciation. He tried to split his portion of the trust, Mr. Fry continued. Not for himself, but to legally separate your jointly built assets from Hale control. That was 15 years ago. I stared at the page. Why hadn't Daniel told me? And the family refused, Mr. Fry said. They blocked his request. But he hesitated. There's more. Daniel had made a second attempt. Quietly. Secretly. 2 years before he died. Except this time, something had actually changed. He'd begun shifting funds. Not Hale funds into our accounts, but our funds out of any Hale-connected financial institutions, so they couldn't claim them. He'd been protecting me. But the Hales? They interpreted those movements as him taking family money. They saw him withdrawing from joint investment portfolios that partially overlapped with the Hale Trust, an overlap Daniel had been trying to untangle for decades. And now that he was gone, they believed everything legally reverted to the family. I felt sick. Daniel had been shielding me from a battle he knew would happen. He had tried to fix the financial entanglement quietly. He just hadn't lived long enough to finish. The Hale family wasn't just greedy, they believed they were reclaiming what belonged to them. But they were wrong. And I was going to prove it. One piece of evidence at a time. Because if Daniel's note said, "Check everything," I would honor that. But I didn't yet know that the deeper I checked, the darker it would get. Especially when I discovered what Judith had done behind my back. Something that crossed from greed into fraud. Once I understood the family's motivations, I began the painstaking work of tracking every financial intersection between my accounts and theirs. I approached it like a forensic accountant, not a grieving widow. I woke up early. I brewed coffee. I pulled Daniel's pencil-marked ledgers from storage. Then I laid out everything on the large dining room table: statements, folders, scanned emails, trust documents, investment summaries. What I found was a tangle of decades-old transactions. Shared investment portfolios established when Daniel was young, long before we merged our finances. Accounts he had tried to disentangle. Transfers he had corrected. And small but suspicious adjustments that he never made. Adjustments made after he was hospitalized. Months before he died. I recognized the dates immediately. Daniel had been sedated during that time. Weak. In and out of consciousness. He couldn't have authorized those changes. Someone else did. I pulled the statements closer. The signatures on the adjustment forms looked forced. Not identical to Daniel's usual handwriting. I felt my breath slow. The signatures were imitations. Not perfect, but close enough for someone who didn't expect scrutiny. I scanned every line. Every number. Every description attached to each transaction. And then I saw it. A series of small withdrawals labeled Hale Family Reconciliation Transfer. Transfers from our joint portfolio into a Hale-managed account. Not huge amounts, each one subtle, but collectively significant. Transfers that Daniel did not authorize. My heart clenched. I knew who had been visiting him during that time. Judith. She had insisted on being involved in his care. She had positioned herself as the grieving sister, the responsible one. She hovered, whispered about protecting the family assets, and encouraged me to focus on Daniel rather than paperwork. All the while, she had stolen from him. And from me. I needed proof. Formal proof. I contacted the investment firm. Requested authorization logs. Signature verifications. Access logs. Visitor logs. After days of waiting, a representative called me. "Mrs. Hale," he said cautiously, "we located something concerning." He emailed me login timestamps. Someone had accessed Daniel's investment account on 3 days when Daniel was on heavy sedation. The access came from a device in the Hale family home. Not our home. And the user authentication? A recovery email tied to Judith. Judith had been logging in as Daniel. Making changes. Initiating transfers. Signing his name. This was no misunderstanding. This was covert asset shifting. Fraud. But I still needed something more definitive. The signature comparison. A forensic specialist confirmed it. The signatures weren't Daniel's. They were traced. The report arrived one cold morning, and I held it in my trembling hands. This was my leverage. But I wanted to be patient. Careful. Strategic. I wanted the confrontation to happen in a way none of them could escape. And I needed to understand one last thing, what exactly they thought they had claim to. So I contacted the Hale attorney, not as a victim, but as someone quietly gathering ammunition. I asked for documentation relating to the trust dispute. What they sent me was more than I expected. Emails. Internal memos. And one message written by Judith that made my stomach twist with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "We need to recover the family funds before Margaret drains what's left." Drain. As if I were some parasite. As if the money didn't come from decades of mine and Daniel's work. I sat back in my chair, the email glowing on my laptop screen, and felt a steady calm settle over me. They had underestimated me. Deeply. And now I had the evidence to prove every lie, every theft, every manipulation. I knew then exactly what I had to do. But before I could enact my plan, I received a sudden invitation. A family meeting. At their estate. They said it was to resolve matters peacefully. I knew better. This was the beginning of their end. The Hale estate was a sprawling property, elegant and imposing, with white brick walls and tall, narrow windows that always made me feel watched. Entering it felt like stepping onto a stage, a place where every word, every gesture, every breath was measured. Judith greeted me with a tight smile. "Margaret. I'm glad you came. We want to sort this out without unnecessary drama." Drama. A word the Hales only used when they sensed control slipping. Inside, the rest of the family was already seated. Judith's brother, Charles. Their mother, Eloise. Even the attorney they had hired to represent the family's interests. I sat down calmly. They expected fear. I brought evidence. Judith opened the meeting with her rehearsed monologue. "We discovered irregularities in the Hale family trust after Daniel's passing," she said. "Funds were moved without authorization. Assets were redistributed. Accounts were drained." I raised an eyebrow. "By whom?" She blinked. "Well, we assumed it was Daniel. Or you." There it was. The accusation spoken aloud. I leaned forward, my voice controlled. "Judith, before we continue, I'd like to clarify something. You believe Daniel withdrew money from the Hale Trust into our accounts?" "Yes," she said quickly. "And now that he's gone, we need to correct that." I nodded slowly. "And you're claiming that any funds Daniel moved were Hale property?" "Exactly." I paused. "Then explain this." I reached into my bag and placed 3 documents on the table. The login timestamps. The investment access logs. The forensic signature analysis. Judith stiffened. Her mother adjusted her glasses. Charles frowned. The attorney began reading. And as he continued, his expression shifted from neutrality to concern. I spoke clearly, each word deliberate. "These documents prove that during the final months of Daniel's life, when he was sedated, declining, and often unconscious, someone accessed his accounts using a recovery email registered to you, Judith." Her jaw tightened. I continued. During those accesses, funds were transferred out of Daniel and my joint investment account into a Hale-controlled portfolio. Judith's face reddened. She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. No. You're going to listen. The attorney cleared his throat. Judith, these signatures aren't Daniel's. Silence filled the room. Thick. Heavy. Judith stammered, the trust was suffering. I was protecting the family money. That money, I said, wasn't Hale Trust money. It was ours. Daniel and I earned it. You stole it. Her mother gasped. Charles leaned back, stunned. Judith's voice cracked. It was the family's. It always has been. I shook my head. You've confused possession with entitlement. And you've confused tradition with legal right. Then I revealed the final piece. My attorney's findings. The documentation proving Daniel's years of attempts to separate our assets from theirs. His efforts to protect me. His concern that his family would try exactly this. Eloise whispered, he kept this from us. I looked her in the eye. He didn't trust you with our life. Not anymore. The Hale attorney cleared his throat once more. Mrs. Hale, he said to me slowly, you are legally and ethically entitled to every dollar in the accounts Judith accessed. And with this evidence, you could pursue criminal charges. Judith's face drained of color. She whispered, you wouldn't. I let the silence stretch. Then I said softly. You've given me every reason to. But I wasn't done yet. Because the real twist, the part they absolutely weren't expecting, was still in my bag. The part that would turn everything upside down. Something Daniel left behind for me. And something that would make this meeting unforgettable. As the room sat in stunned silence, I reached once more into my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Daniel's. Judith's eyes widened. What is that? I spoke clearly. This is the last document Daniel ever wrote concerning the Hale family trust. I found it in our safe 2 weeks ago. I chose today to open it. I slid a finger under the seal. Inside were 3 pages. Daniel's handwriting was shaky, written during his illness, but still legible. I read aloud, slowly, so every word resonated. To Maggie. If you are reading this, then the Hales have begun circling. They always wanted control. I tried to protect our life. If they come after you, use the enclosed. It is the truth they can't deny. I paused before unfolding the final page. This, I said, is Daniel's legal declaration. Signed, notarized, and witnessed. The Hale attorney leaned forward. May I? I handed it to him. As he scanned the page, his eyebrows rose. Then he exhaled sharply. This changes everything. Judith snapped, what does it say? He looked at her, expression flat. It says Daniel renounced his portion of the Hale family trust 15 years ago. Voluntarily. Legally. Permanently. Eloise's hand flew to her mouth. Charles leaned forward. That isn't possible. He never told us. Because, I said quietly, he knew you'd try to reverse it. The attorney continued reading. Furthermore, Daniel states that from that date forward, all income, investments, and accounts he shared with Margaret are the exclusive property of their marital estate. I turned to Judith. That means nothing you claim belongs to the Hale family. Not anymore. Judith's voice rose, unsteady, desperate. No. No. That's not fair. The trust, everything we were promised, he couldn't just leave. I met her gaze. Daniel didn't leave you. He left the system you worship more than your relationships. Her face twisted. The attorney placed the document firmly on the table. Legally, this invalidates all Hale claims to Margaret's assets. Completely. Judith slammed her palm on the table. He was manipulated. She made him do this. The accusation hung in the air. I didn't flinch. Judith, I said, my voice steady, Daniel was tired of your family's obsession with control. He made this choice himself. And you proved his worries correct by forging his signature and stealing from him while he was helpless. I reached into my folder and laid out the forensic report. If I hand this report to the police, you'll be charged with fraud, identity misuse, and financial exploitation. Her face drained of all color. But I'm giving you one chance, I said quietly. One chance to correct what you did. She whispered, what do you want? I want every dollar back. Every cent you moved. Return to the exact account you stole it from. Her voice trembled. And if I refuse? I looked her dead in the eyes. You won't. Because I will not only press charges, I will expose everything. Every document. Every signature. Every login. And your family will know exactly what you did. Judith's composure shattered. But I wasn't finished. I stood up slowly. And one more thing. Every pair of eyes lifted toward me. From this moment forward, the Hales will have no further access to me, my accounts, or my home. We are done. Judith began to cry softly. Her mother stared at the table, pale and silent. Charles rubbed his forehead, unable to meet my gaze. I turned, ready to leave. But just as I reached the doorway, Judith whispered something that stopped me cold. You think you've won, Margaret. But you didn't discover everything. I turned slowly. She looked up at me with a strange, bitter smile. There's more Daniel hid from you. The room seemed to tilt. I stepped back inside. What are you talking about? Judith's eyes glimmered with something between spite and triumph. You'll find out soon. A chill ran down my spine. What was she referring to? What else had Daniel kept buried? And why did she believe it would change everything? I walked out without another word. But that night, alone in my quiet home, I realized Judith wasn't bluffing. There was something I still didn't know. Something I needed to find. Before the Hales used it against me. The next morning, the first transfer hit my account. Judith kept her word, likely out of fear more than remorse. Over the next 48 hours, every stolen dollar returned to the exact place it originated. My accounts refilled. The financial landscape Daniel had built, the one she had tried so hard to manipulate, was restored. But I couldn't shake her final words. There's more Daniel hid from you. I spent days combing through the safe, the office files, his bedside drawer, anywhere he might have left something. Nothing new appeared. Until I remembered an old wooden box Daniel kept in the attic. It was locked, sealed, and dusty. I had never opened it, not out of secrecy, but out of respect. Now, for the first time, I retrieved it. Inside was a collection of items spanning decades, childhood photos, letters from college, small mementos of his early life. And at the very bottom, a folder. Labeled only with my name. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were copies of emails Daniel had never shown me. Messages exchanged between him and the Hale family attorney from 15 years ago. The first email. Mr. Hale, in order to renounce your claim to the Hale family trust, you must understand this decision is permanent. The second. I accept this. My wife and I are building our own life, separate from my family's financial expectations. The third. A reply from the attorney. Your mother is contesting your renunciation. She insists that marital influence is involved. Marital influence. As if my existence controlled him. And then the fourth message, the one that tightened my throat. Daniel wrote. My wife has never interfered with my decisions. She has only ever encouraged my independence. The pressure to align with family control comes entirely from my relatives. Renunciation is my choice, not hers. A tear slipped down my cheek. Daniel had defended me. protected me. And his family twisted that into spite. But the final document in the folder was different. Not an email. A handwritten letter addressed to me, dated 1 month before he died. I unfolded it and read slowly. My Maggie. I know you'll face the Hale family alone after I'm gone, and I'm sorry for that. I couldn't resolve every entanglement before my health declined. But I've done everything I can to protect you. The renunciation should shield our life's work. If the Hales fight you, understand they are fighting the version of me they created in their minds, not the man I chose to become with you. I wiped my eyes. But then the letter continued. There is one more thing you should know. The Hales once attempted to pressure me into declaring our marital home part of the Hale estate. I refused. But if they ever produce documents claiming otherwise, those documents are forged. I kept proof of the original deed in a safe place only you would think to look. A safe place only I would think to look. I read the line again. My mind raced. I walked to the kitchen, opened the cookbook cabinet, and pulled out Daniel's favorite baking book, the one we used every Sunday for decades. I flipped through the pages. Nothing. Then I felt the spine, a slight bulge. I slit the lining gently with a knife. Inside was the deed. The original deed. With only 2 names on it. Daniel Hale. And Margaret Hale. No mention of the Hales' estate. No conditions. No trust. No claim. My breath shook. Judith's threat now made sense. She had hoped I wouldn't find the proof. That she could convince the family I had no right to the home Daniel and I built. But now, I held the truth in my hands. By the end of that week, my attorney filed an official notice with the Hale family lawyer. All claims terminated. All disputes resolved. All attempts to assert property rights rejected. The consequences for Judith came next. She received a formal censure from the investment firm. Her activities were documented. Her access privileges permanently revoked. She narrowly avoided criminal charges. Narrowly. But her reputation, within her family and in the community, was shattered. Days passed. Then weeks. The Hales retreated into silence. Their once loud claims of family money vanished. But I wasn't finished healing. Not yet. Because while justice had been served, I needed to find closure. The kind that doesn't come from winning a battle, but from understanding its cost. In the months that followed, my life became quiet again. Not the quiet of loneliness or loss, but of restoration. Of peace earned the hard way. I sat often on the back porch where Daniel and I spent countless evenings watching the sun dip beneath the horizon. Now, when I looked at the garden we planted together, I felt something warm instead of hollow. I had survived the Hales' entitlement. I had uncovered the truth Daniel tried so hard to protect. I had reclaimed everything that was ours. But most importantly, I had reclaimed myself. When people talk about revenge, they imagine fire and fury. Screaming matches. Public humiliation. Dramatic scenes meant to sting. But real revenge, the kind that leads to healing, comes quietly. It comes through truth. Through evidence. Through calmly exposing wrongdoers with their own actions. And through refusing to let anyone rewrite the story of your life. The Hale family lost more than money. They lost the illusion of moral superiority. They lost the ability to claim Daniel as their puppet. They lost the power they believed they had over me. As for Judith, she sent me a letter months later. A shaky apology. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. But because I had moved on, and I wasn't going back. Closure isn't a conversation. It's a boundary. Looking back now, I understand something Daniel tried to teach me our entire marriage. Some people cling to wealth not because they need it, but because it's the only identity they've ever known. And when you refuse to let them define you, they crumble. I share this story for anyone who has ever been pressured, manipulated, or overshadowed by people who believe they are entitled to your life. You are allowed to protect what you've built. You are allowed to stand firm. You are allowed to say no. Now, as I sit here at 62, I realize revenge was never the point. Truth was. Independence was. Integrity was. And I found all three. If you're still listening, I'd love to know. Have you ever had to stand up against entitled family members? What did you discover about yourself in the process? I'll be here, reading your stories. And I hope mine reminds you. Your life belongs to you.